let's talk about why free trade is a good thing. But before we do that, let's actually talk about what free trade actually is. Free trade is the flow of goods and services across borders that is generally seen as unhindered by government-imposed restrictions, which would include taxes, quotas, tariffs, or any other sort of rule. So goods and services can just flow from one country to the other without any government saying no to that or trying to restrict it in any sort of way. And then we also have the competitive advantage of nations. And the competitive advantage of nations basically says that having a cluster of similar producers within a given nation gives that nation a special advantage over similar producers in other countries. I'll draw this out in just a second. Another reason that free trade might be considered good is the law of comparative advantage. And the law of comparative advantage basically says that efficiency and general economic welfare are promoted when each country produces goods for which it enjoys some sort of a cost advantage. And so free trade is designed to stimulate competition, further an individual initiative, increase productivity, and improve national well-being. Let me just draw this argument out. Some of you have probably seen a production possibilities curve or a production possibilities frontier. And of course, this can also be used to illustrate why free trade would be a good thing. So, you may have seen this before if you've taken economics. The typical goods that we look at a country can make would be something like guns and butter. But I guess let me use something that's a little bit more relatable. Let's maybe say something like rice and oil. Okay, so let's pick a country like Saudi Arabia, right? May not be a surprise, but Saudi Arabia has a lot of oil. One of my friends made a joke that you can pretty much poke the ground and the oil comes right up. So Saudi Arabia's production possibility frontier might look something, be very favorable to oil, but it probably wouldn't be a good country to produce rice in because rice needs a lot of water and it doesn't rain a lot in Saudi Arabia. So they probably have kind of a splayed production possibilities curve because they lose a lot of oil just to produce a little bit of rice, right? And then you got a country like Vietnam where it rains a lot, but oil isn't nearly as accessible. So their curve might look something like make a lot of rice, but they can't really produce a lot of oil. So for every extra little bit of oil they produce, they lose a lot of rice. So what would make sense for Saudi Arabia and Vietnam would be to trade rice for oil. They produce the oil easily, and our friends in Vietnam can produce rice easy, but not oil. So they make a lot of rice, they make a lot of oil, they trade, and of course, everybody has more. That's the general idea behind this. So free trade, as I've illustrated it here, is good for everybody. Everybody gets to produce things that they're actually good at doing. They don't focus on things they're not as good at doing, and then they can wind up trading the surplus. All right, so we also have an argument against free trade, and that's protectionism. And let's define protectionism real quick. Protectionism is the use of trade barriers to shield domestic industries from foreign competitors. And there's reasons to do that. First of all, some countries have an unhealthy trade deficit. In other words, they import too many goods and they don't export enough. And you think about that, that's almost like, I don't know, overusing a credit card, for example, right? You're spending more money than you actually earn. So that's a bad thing. So you may want to do protectionism to reduce the amount of imports you have and promote exports, for example. Now, some governments can also use industrial policy to promote the growth of technologies, companies, or industry sectors. Let me give a couple of examples here. Most countries have some degree of protectionism on agriculture. Okay? Now, the very basic reason is you have to have at least some degree of agriculture, because what if there was a war and you couldn't trade? A country that can't feed its own people can't fight. So it's a very basic survival mechanism. Other countries may wish to promote a certain industrial sector within their country. So they would use protectionism to help nourish an infant industry and protect it from foreign competition. Some companies might lobby their politicians in order to get some sort of a preferential protectionist policy so that they don't have to compete with international firms. So there's a variety of reasons to do that. And of course, in addition to just a basic protectionism as a form of law, right? You cannot import these products or these goods and services in here. Some countries also use unfair tactics. So let me think of some examples. I know that, and I won't name the country because I think this is so outlandish. There was one European country that is notoriously bureaucratic, and their local electronics industry was not able to compete with some of the large electronics companies in Asia. They couldn't, because of WTO, say we will not accept electronic goods from Asia. So what they did is they said that every single electronics product that came in from Asia, especially VCRs, had to be tested by a customs official to verify that they were VCRs. So what happened is this company from Asia sent its large boat full of VCRs into a French port. I guess I've just told you what country that was. So they sent it into a French port, and there was one customs inspector to look at the entire boat full of VCRs. So he would plug every single one of them in, verify this is a VCR, and then he'd take like a break and all this kind of stuff. So it'd take 15-20 minutes just to verify a single VCR, and none of those products were getting to market. Okay, that's one example. Furthermore, some countries, particularly developing countries, may use tariffs as a way to generate revenue. A lot of countries that are developing don't have income and sales tax infrastructures that are developed like we do in the westernized or industrialized world, so the tariffs are an important source of income. Now, again, most free traders are against protectionists. We talked about the overall benefit argument, first of all, and of course, the reduction of defensive barriers are a major source of international trade. Still, even in the United States, we have some unique examples of protectionism. The first one is the Federal Buy American Act. And the Federal Buy American Act says if you are using something, or if you are purchasing something through federal requisitions, you are authorized to pay a certain percentage more to use an American company than a foreign company. Now, I can remember this from when I was in the Army. I was in a unit that loved fancy technology and big screen TVs. And we had big screen TVs and flat screen things like everywhere you went. Now, at that time, I believe it was 10%. You could pay 10% more for an American product. Now, I was in Korea at the time, and we wanted to buy the Samsung ones. Well, yes, we could have paid 10% more for an American flat screen TV. However, the Samsungs were cheaper much cheaper than the American products, such that the 10% was irrelevant, so we bought Samsung products. There's also the Merchant Marine Act. And the Merchant Marine Act, and actually there's also the Passenger Vessel Services Act. You can see me. Both of these are basically saying, let's see, Merchant Marine Act and Passenger Vessel Services Act combined give this message of you cannot have foreign ships sailing in American waterways. So for example, a British ship can't sail up the Mississippi River, and of course that has a historical precedent. Imagine like during the War of 1812, if British merchant ships and British military vessels were able to sail up the Mississippi and bombard our coasts. And they both also say that if it is an American ship traveling from one American port to another, the vessel must be American flagged, American crewed, and by an American company. And so even though tariffs overall have declined over the years, a lot of other countries also have certain kinds of protectionist policies. So China, for example, has a lot of barriers on imports of watches, automobiles, steel, textiles, and a lot of food products. Again, that's to protect these infant industries. In Japan, they restrict the importation of most American agricultural products. They always argue it's because our products aren't as clean as theirs. European Union also has extensive restrictions on American products because they don't like GMOs. Taiwan, of course, has restrictions on the importation of rice. Again, if there were to be a war, Taiwan would have to feed its own people. Korea has a lot of trade restrictions and other non-sort of tariff barriers on a variety of agricultural products. Brazil has tariffs on technological products, again trying to protect those infant industries. And Mexico, which has a large agricultural sector, generally restricts the importation of agricultural products. So in our next module, we're going to talk about corruption. It's one of my favorite topics, and I'm looking forward to seeing you then.